Okay. Hello, and thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Zachary Carter. I'm a Research and Monitoring Coordinator at the Palouse Conservation District, and I'm giving a presentation today entitled Conservation with Native Plants. This is part of our monthly conservation talk series that we were hosting, and has been subsequently put on hold because of the Stay at Home, Stay Safe order. And I gave this presentation in March, but we thought we would host this presentation again to make it available to people staying at home right now. So let's jump right in. A little bit of an overview of this presentation. I'm going to go over the history of the Palouse Prairie and then talk about some of the plants that we typically use on our conservation projects at Palouse CD, and then talk about some of the practices that we use to help landowners achieve their conservation goals. And then I'm going to give you some of my contact information if you have any questions. So first off, the Palouse Prairie, it's an area about 50,000 square kilometers, and it stretches across Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. This landscape is dominated by rolling loess hills, which are wind-blown silt deposits, which were eroded from alluvial material from the Missoula flooding events. The uppermost layer of material is estimated to be deposited about 15,000 years ago. Typical plants in this area, in the Palouse Prairie, consist of perennial bunch grasses, forbs, shrubs, and trees, and I'll go over a few of those later on. Just to back up a little bit, the Palouse Prairie is distinct from the Camas Prairie to the south, and it is separated by the Clearwater River. And then some of the Native Americans that were here prior to European settlement were the Palouse, Colville, the Nez Perce, the Cayuse, Walla Walla, Yakima, Spokane, and Coeur d'Alene tribes. A really great resource if you want to know more about the tribes that were present before European settlement is attached to this link here, nativeland.ca. It's a great interactive map, and it's a great resource for learning more about this area. So European settlement brought great agricultural prosperity to this region, but this development also led to the decline and fragmentation of the Palouse Prairie ecosystem. Here's a great image of a Palouse Prairie remnant. They typically contain Idaho fescue, blue bunch wheatgrass, various shrub communities, particularly the climax group of blue bunch wheatgrass and snowberry. There are also black hawthorns and roses present throughout the landscape, throughout these remnants. This is also a great image that shows the intersection of agricultural land and these riparian areas and upland areas. So these uncultivated areas will typically contain these prairie remnants or various pines growing along the edge, as well as the riparian area, which is typically also uncultivated, which Palouse CD work on restoration of a riparian area contrasted by an upland area. These riparian areas contain plains cottonwoods, quaking aspens, mountain alders, red alders, and I'll jump into more of these riparian plants later on. Throughout the Palouse, we also have wetlands that contain camas. If you're lucky, you could see them right now in the spring. They're beautiful, as well as forbs, grasses, sedges, and rushes. And then the image to the right shows what it kind of looks like outside right now in the spring. You can see camas, sticky geranium, blanket flower, and arrowleaf balsam root. So jumping into some of these plants that we use for restoration and conservation, I'm going to talk about a few of my favorite plants and some of their characteristics and their historical uses. And to start off, I want to say I'm not advocating for anyone to consume these native plants. Rather, I'm promoting people to do their own research. So to start out with, one of my favorites is the blue elderberry, which belongs to the Edoxaceae family, formerly in the Caprifoliaceae or honeysuckle family. These shrubs are typically between 6 and 13 feet and multi-stemmed. They have deciduous leaves, meaning they lose their leaves in the fall. And they're pinnately compounded, which means that each leaf is subdivided into smaller leaflets. These leaflets are opposite from one another, and they have serrated margins. Serrated just means they have a sawtooth margin to them. They have flat top inflorescence with white to cream colored flowers, and inflorescence is just a flowering structure. And their fruits are berries that are covered in a white bloom, and the berries themselves are blue to blackish in color. These elderberries will grow in slopes, canyons, cliff bases, stream sides, in sagebrush complexes, and in ponderosa pine systems. Their uses range from jams, syrups, pies, wine, tea, to medicine and dyes. People have made arrow shafts, flutes, and whistles out of their stems, which are hollow and pithy. As medicine, these plants have been used to treat fevers, headaches, indigestion, twitching eyes, colds, and influenza. And for some of the pictures, you can see on the top left of what this shrub looks like when it's more fully grown. The bottom left image has a good picture of their cyme structure with white cream flowers. And then on the top right, you can see the pinnately divided leaves as well as the serrated margins on each of the leaflets. The next plant on our list is chokecherry, which belongs to the Rosaceae or rose family. This plant also gets up to 12 feet, is single to multi-stemmed and rhizomatous. And rhizomatous just means that it has underground stems that helps allow the plant to clone itself along the bank. But these rhizomatous structures are a great resource for restoration of riparian areas because they help to stabilize degrading banks. So these plants are deciduous with simple alternate leaves and serrated margins as well. Inflorescence contains white flowers with 5 petals, and the fruits are fleshy drupes, and drupes are similar to plums with a stone in the middle. And the fruits are typically red to black in color, and you can see them usually coming out around August. As for cultural uses, they've been used for food and medicine, to wine, jams, and jellies, and pemmican. And pemmican is a traditional food that contains tallow, meat, and fruit. And some other uses for this for chokecherry are erosion control, once again using that rhizomatous feature to our advantage to stabilize banks. They also provide great shelter for wildlife and act as a pollinator source for energy, as well as pollinator nesting habitat. So some images here are the white flowers of the chokecherry on the bottom left image. You can sort of see some of the serrations on the top right image along the leaves, the margins of the leaves. And you can also see on the bottom right image their fruits they produce. These aren't ripe. When the fruits are ripe, they typically turn black to dark purple. Next up is the golden currant, which is in the Grossulariaceae or currant family, which contains both currants and gooseberries. These shrubs typically are between 3 and 10 feet, multi-stemmed, and once again rhizomatous. Their leaves are deciduous, alternate, and lobed, so they kind of have 3 to 5 lobes on their leaves, kind of taking the shape of a hand. The inflorescence are racemes with golden flowers and contain 5 petals. They're typically trumpet-shaped. They're very conspicuous. The fruits are a berry, and they change from a multitude of colors while they ripen, from green to yellow, red, black, and then in purple. And you can typically see these as early as May. Cultural uses of this plant as well are jams and jellies and pies, which is a recurring theme throughout all of these throughout this presentation. The fruits are also used in pemmican, as well as coloring for ceramics. And these fruits also are great for wildlife. So the bottom left image has a great example of the lobed nature of these leaves. Top right image are the golden trumpet-shaped flowers, and the bottom right shows many different colors along the path to ripening for these golden currants. Next on the list is another Rosaceae family plant. This one's black hawthorn. These plants typically grow between 13 and 20 feet and are multi-stemmed. They have deciduous, simple leaves with doubly serrated margins. So that just means, well, there'll be images later on, but they have serrations on serrations. And they have very painful half-inch long thorns. And if you've ever heard of a thorn creek, that stream probably got its name because of this plant here. They're very painful to go through. The hawthorn produces white flowers, typically at the end of branches, of each branch, and has 5 petals. Each flower has 5 petals. The fruit is a pome, which is like an apple, and the fruit are typically dark purple, and you can see them around late summer. The thorns of this plant were used as needles and for fishing hooks, and the berries as medicine and in pemmican. And the plant itself provides great habitat and forage for birds and small mammals. So here's a few more images. On the bottom left image, you can see not only one set of serrations going along the margin, but larger, deeper serrations towards the tips of the leaves, which make it doubly serrated. And the bottom right image is a great example of how nasty some of these thorns can be. But overall, it's a great wildlife plant. Next up, once again in the rose family, is Serviceberry. These plants can get up to 24 feet and are multi-stemmed and rhizomatous. The leaves are deciduous, simple, and alternate along the stem. And the margins transition from smooth towards the base of the leaf to serrated towards the tip of the leaf. The inflorescence are racemes of 5 to 15 flowers with 5 white petals. And the fruits are purple pomes. This plant, once again, jams, syrups, and pies, also made into wines, dried fruit, added to pemmican, and as well as used in teas. And the stems were used as arrow shafts and spears. This is also a great wildlife plant, provides great forage with its fruit, and then it's also the host for the swallowtail butterfly larva. It's a great restoration plant because of its rhizomatous nature. So on the top right image, you can sort of see at the tips of the leaves, there are serrated margins, and there are smooth margins towards the base of the leaves. And then the fruits take this purple color in, in fall. And here's an image of a fully grown swallowtail butterfly, although this plant is a host for the swallowtail larva. Next up on the list is snowberry. This plant belongs to the honeysuckle family, also known as Caprifoliaceae. It typically grows between 3 to 6 feet and is multi-stemmed and rhizomatous. The leaves are opposite and oval in shape with smooth margins, or tooth margins, or irregularly lobed. So it can take many forms. So sometimes makes the plant identification based on the leaves a little more difficult. The inflorescence is a raceme with white to creamy flowers, and the fruits are very conspicuous white drupes. You can really see them in winter when all the plants have lost their leaves and these are kind of sticking onto the plant. The traditional uses for these plants are brooms were made out of the stems, as well as an eye wash or skin ointments. The berries contain saponins, so soaps were made from the berries, and then they have been used in a decoction of roots and stems to assist with tuberculosis, STIs, and fevers. And it also provides great livestock and wildlife forage. So this central image, you can kind of see one leaf taking this heart-shaped pattern, a little more lobed to it, whereas the other leaf directly across from it is more oval in shape. So the leaves can take many forms, but here are the smaller white flowers and the very large conspicuous white berries. Next up on the list is woods rose, definitely belonging to the rose family. This shrub is between 1/2 foot to 6.5 feet, is multi-stemmed and rhizomatous. The leaves are deciduous and also are alternate and pinnately divided. And the leaflets have serrated margins with many prickles along the stem. The inflorescence are cymes with 5 petals and range in color from pink to lilac pink to lavender, and typically come out between June and August. And the fruit is actually an aggregate fruit, which we typically call a hip, and they're usually bright red, and these also stick on throughout winter. This plant has been used in teas, jellies, jams, and cakes, as well as basketry, and because of its rhizomatous nature, it's great for erosion control. It also is great for livestock and wildlife food sources and shelter for birds and small mammals. The hips are a great source of vitamin C and are eaten by many animals, including squirrels, deer, coyote, bears, especially when a lot of other food sources are limited during the winter. So it's a great winter food source. So this is typically what people think of when they think of a rose. This is not what they look like in nature, at least the woods rose. This is what they look like. 5 petals. These are pink. These flowers are pink, but as I said, they can take a variety of different colors, or they can come in a variety of different colors. And they have a pretty conspicuous red hip that is the aggregate fruit that you can see on the bottom left image. And then the serrated margins along the leaflets. So all these plants are kind of just a component of the bigger picture, the goal of healthy functioning ecosystems, which involve many different aspects, but includes soils, healthy soils, streams and rivers, sustainable agricultural and livestock usage, and responsible urban development. These are all components of this healthy functioning ecosystem that we're trying to strive for. So here's a list of typical conservation goals that people have and they want to attain on their property. A lot of times people are looking for wildlife habitat, practices that increase water quality or improve water quality, practices that reduce erosion, and that also improve soil health, as well as just boosting the aesthetics of their property. So some common conservation practices to achieve those goals are listed here. Typical ones that we deal with a lot in the Palouse are riparian forest buffers, livestock management, conservation tillage. So these are a few of the tools available to landowners to achieve their goals for their property. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the riparian forest buffers that we work with. We assist landowners on their properties. So a riparian area is an area that's the green ribbon occurring along streams and rivers that separates the aquatic environment from the upland environment. So riparian is Latin for riverbank, and in North America, they occupy 2% of the landscape, but provide habitat for 1/3 of the plant species. So I can't stress enough about how important these areas are for healthy, functioning landscapes. Riparian areas provide canopy cover for the stream. The roots of the plants that grow in the riparian areas stabilize banks, as we've talked about with these rhizomatous plants. These plants also intercept soil nutrients, so it doesn't all flow through the system and go into our larger waterways. And then it also provides habitat for wildlife. The plants act as a physical barrier to flooding, so it dissipates some of that flooding energy and assists in storage of that water in groundwater for later use and support of flows during summer low flow conditions. And if nothing else, these riparian areas add to property value. So restoration of these essential functions includes revegetation of banks, but can also include weed control and stabilization or reconfiguration of the banks, as well as fencing. So these are highly impacted ecosystems because of the settlement and population growth, but they play a highly important role in the health of our landscape. So next I'm going to show a few pictures of a riparian restoration project in progress. So if you've ever seen these long strips of black plastic along the streams, those are actually used for weed control, and we'll plant our riparian plants in these fabric strips, and typically you'll see tree tubes around the plants to prevent browse and damage from wildlife and livestock. So in these plastic strips, just like I said, prevent weeds from popping up and competing with these plants that we're putting in, these riparian plants that we are planting along the stream bank. And so over time, if you are able to, or if we're able to support these plants with water and weed control, they can develop into slightly larger plants and become more established along the riparian area. And given enough time, they can become quite large. And down the road, we'll be able to pull out the mulch fabric, and these plants should hopefully sustain themselves. So given enough time, we can transform, or we can restore these degraded riparian areas into these healthy functioning riparian areas. Another common goal that landowners have is the support of pollinators and beneficial insects. So these pollinators and beneficial insects require habitat, nesting sites, food, nectar, and pollen-producing plants. These insects have been highly affected by this habitat fragmentation and loss due to urban sprawl and agricultural development. They also are highly affected by pesticide contact and pathogen exposure, as well as non-native competition. So one thing that we can do at Palouse CD is provide technical assistance to support pollinator habitat on your project and create plans for pollinator projects, which can include seed mixes or planting plans. So some of the resources that are available to people if you're interested in more plant identification, is the USDA plants database, which is where I pulled a lot of the information from today's presentation. If you're looking for a field guide for plant identification for the area, the Palouse Prairie Field Guide by Skinner et al. Is a great resource. And if more plant identification resources would be the Washington and Idaho Wildflowers app, which is free for both Android and Apple products. If you're interested in pollinators or the plants that support pollinators, the Xerxes Society is a great resource for all of that information. But if you're interested in conservation on your property, which can include riparian restoration or pollinator, supporting pollinator habitat, you can always contact your local conservation district or NRCS office. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me via email or phone. My contact information is listed here. And thank you everybody for attending today, and stay healthy out there.